Lobby?
Close convention center atrium foyer.
Foyer. I love
I
it.
went
The
I
correct.
went look I went looking for a place that would be quiet enough to not have a ton of background noise, and then when I couldn't find that, I went for some place that was had consistent background noise. And then I realized I sat down next to the railroad tracks. So 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 there you go.
We
That's how it stands.
well, let's get a debrief. Are there a bunch of raving digital twin fans based on your presentation yesterday?
It went very well. And I'm not just saying that because it's my own presentation. I would say it if it went poorly. It was there were a lot of people nodding their head. I told them that I had my egg-headed friends were like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you have to talk about digital twin." And that went well because then I was able to juxtapose the digital twin naysayers with the digital twin uh, marketeers, I guess. So there was nobody in the room who was excited for the prospect of an airplane made up of ones and zeros being put on a flyer that says digital twin. No one was happy about that state of affairs. So I was able to kind of like, I think I got people with the contrarian nature of the feedback. And you're not the only person that told me they were, I guess, fatigued from the hype. And so the prep ended up being I basically went through a bunch of specific machining cases and said, okay, here are the things I know about machining, and here's progress in digital twin for CNC machining, going from a chunk of metal with a pocket being milled out of it, and that's digital twin, up to the stuff that's available now, where you have the entire the entire machine model is sitting on the controller and ships with the machine tool itself for a variety of purposes. And once you had 8 or 10 years of history all in the same slide deck, the progress looks better than when you're just looking at, well, this is what it does now, but here are all the things that it doesn't do yet. So it went well. People liked it.
Did you get into like a discussion at all about large complex systems and digital twins? Like,
Yeah. So the whole thing was from the perspective of systems engineering, and the professor who opened up the manufacturing track, two presenters before me, talked. He had this gigantic architecture of everything under the sun that would be considered, kind of inside the space of what you want to have a digital twin of. And I'm like, there are people that have one subset of one box of this eye chart, and they spend their entire career working on just that one little thing, right? So if you could have somebody that spends all of their time, all of their life on, one little drill bit in a metal cutting operation, and that's the only thing they're concerned with, is like, how do I get the perfect model of this drill bit, or at least like a 10-year research career. So I think that it was actually helpful to have massively broad systems thinking, and then like a little conversation from that guy before me talking about how do you get students to think about things from a systems perspective. How do you think about the interplay of, you've built your thing, but is it a one-off, or is it actually, you know was it actually tied back to the single source of truth? There was pushback from Rolls-Royce in the audience, who were like, hey, now this is all great for you to have your architecture, but what about every other vendor in my supply chain? We have 30,000 vendors deep, and each of them has their own thing in their own little swim lane, and they're all built to purpose, but they also don't integrate with each other appropriately up and down the supply chain.
a great point.
When my thesis was this whole thing is kind of a mess, it's hard to go wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, the other key question is, did you take Panera in?
No, there were provided light breakfast options, and they were good. That was good. I had the best hotel convention center almond pastry that I can remember. So that's something.
So you went into your presentation with a really nice glucose spike then.
I don't know anything about health. I just know that I ate one of those things several hours beforehand. and I was shivering. It was so cold while giving the presentation. It was the first time I'd shivered through a presentation before.
Shivered.
I feel honestly, not to get too meta about it, but talking on a topic that was somebody else's title, and then you wrote a presentation to somebody else's title, combined with an hour session, which normally I would be like, I'll talk for 30 minutes. Combined with it's the first time this event has ever taken place. It was a lot of question marks, and it
Can
turned
you
out
share?
totally fine.
Can you share the event?
Yeah, it's the Modular Open Systems Approach Summit and Expo 2023 Atlanta, and
Too many words.
yeah, that's the name of it. I didn't make the name. That's the
Yeah.
name.
Well, the too many words. Fun. When when you and I first discussed Happy Joe, however many weeks ago, you made a statement that really stuck with me, and something to the effect you introduced me to a concept that's not special but was new for me to think about in this context, and it was the concept of learning publicly,
Yeah,
and uh, that is today's discussion for sure. And um, not to have zero segue at all from machine tooling to the topic of beauty, but I just thought that that would be the context for today's discussion is a public learning session.
I think this segue is. I mean, it's very easy to discuss beauty out of context, meaning you have a nice little bucket of beauty, and as soon as the rest of your life gets involved, it's like riding a Harley Davidson. Hear me out. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
If you buy a Harley and you ride a Harley, you can't ever really not be a Harley rider, or else all the other Harley riders will accuse you of playing dress up.
Which is a real thing.
That I've heard that Harley riders can really rag on each other for which ones are real and which ones are fake. So similarly, if beauty is constrained to the hours outside of flying to a convention center to give a speech on a too many words conference, then you're going to be like, I don't want beauty to be working for the weekend if beauty is my weekend. I gotta have it interwoven throughout. Maybe not in that exact pastry, and maybe not in that exact frosty windowless room with a large accordion divider where you can hear laughter through the wall and overhead lighting only. I mean, maybe there's not beauty specifically in that, but certainly in the day, you got to find it in the day.
No, you're leading in exactly where I want to go. So if the topic that we want to investigate, and this is just an opening salvo, I want to come back to this topic a bunch because there are specific things I want to learn about it, and ideas, whatever limited influence ends up having, ideas that I would like us to introduce into the ether. Because I think they're unique perspectives that I'm looking for, clarity on, and I think the obvious, um, sort of maybe tired approach to a topic titled "The Evolution of Culture Beauty" would be to say, well, 50 years ago we built beautiful buildings and we did beautiful things, and today it's all gone to hell.
Oh, you know how I
Um,
feel about that.
so I do too, but this is not even on the same city block really as that concept. What I want to think about is standing where we are today and looking forward 40 or 50 years. How do we evolve with beauty? And more specifically, two different sort of parallel thoughts. Conceptually, I think we measure beauty by the aesthetic sort of final product, the final thing that we see in front of us. there's a science of beauty. I started reading a little bit on that today, and I don't want to throw a bunch of half-baked, sentences that I've read from research articles into today's discussion. This is a conceptual discussion. We want to get into that, but the science of beauty, and that's one thought. Another thought is, and probably related, is setting aside the objective end, or the aesthetic objective end of what we measure beauty as typically. What are the non-linearities associated with beauty? It's it's a complex system. I think there are obviously symmetry when we encounter something and we instinctively have a response, a positive response to it. Scientifically, what is that? What does that look like? What do we regard as beautiful? Does intent of its creator focus in or factor into our perception of what is beautiful? So the science of beauty, looking out 40 years is one thing. And then the other, probably more important topic or angle of this discussion for me is this, and this is going to sound weird, but hear me out. I wonder what it looks like, especially for our younger generation. Every generation is trying to make their mark, and distinguish itself from prior generations. And I think if we look objectively at all of the institutions today, they're all governed by people of a certain age that govern, whether it's religion, corporate, government. All of our institutions are governed by people, led by people of a certain age that lead with compliance and fear. And it's all of these negative things to get the outcome that institution is trying to achieve. If a younger generation, and again, this is, I'm just positing a thought. If a younger generation, what I root for younger generations when they write their history books 50 years from now, scoffing at the way we've led and the way we've tried to enact policies, because they've undertaken what it looks like to do those institutions through the lens of beauty. How do we get outcomes that we want by presenting and leading with beauty? People, I think, I don't know what that looks like. I want us to tease that out over the course of time. I want to come back to this topic, but as an opening salvo, I think, what does it look like for venture dollars, for venture capital dollars, to follow and seek out tools and systems and products that are focused on cultivating beauty? What does that even mean? And I think that's the aspect of this conversation that I want to sort of sift through. 40, 50 years from now, how does culture evolve to incorporate the science of beauty? What does that mean? I think there's some interesting sort of preliminary studies, but what does it look like to better understand the science of beauty? And then the step beyond that is, how do we leverage that understanding to create products and create institutions and lead in institutions and drive outcomes societally, globally, through the prism of beauty instead of compliance and fear and control and sort of the method, the MO that we have today.
I mean, compliance isn't going to go anywhere. So there's been tension for every generation, and there will be tension going forward. It's 5 questions away from an existential crisis, right? So if it's where does beauty come from in the institutions that govern everyday life? Okay, well it comes from, take your pick, but like education, or it comes from funding of public spaces, or endowments for the arts. But do these institutions that promote the arts per se, I mean, is that sufficient to actually promote beauty, or are those just as inclined to dysfunction and, twisting as any other institution? And if you're saying, burn down all the institutions because they prevent beauty, well, there's a flip side to that coin if you want to burn down all the institutions as well.
I will never, I want to get this on the record. I am in no way saying burn down institutions. I'm saying, wait, what does it look like to do it differently?
But what if we're just on a continuum and there's, we're all on a roller coaster ride, except it just goes up and down like this forever, and there's no actual there's no actual incline. Because I think backwards to what would somebody having this conversation 50 years ago in person in a diner be thinking? Like, how would they be conceptualizing the same thing? There's no way this is original material, right? So there have always been people that are thinking in these terms, and what would they have said about 50 years prior to them, and what would they say about where the same thing lands today? And also, a lot of this comes down, in my opinion, it ends up being, aging and disillusionment. So the older you get, the more you see, the more disillusioned you get in some cases. And in other cases, the more you see, the more, happy you get.
So I would say, you know, and with respect to prior generations having these discussions, I don't think there's any prior art. I know there's not, at least from a scientific perspective, on the science of beauty. And maybe that hasn't, that's a different thought than the conceptual nature of, our future generations going to value beauty the way we do. But what does it look like to understand the science of beauty? Again, there are some, I did read some, sort of from the past 7, 8 years. Granted, not a full, heavy research, but from the past 7, 8 years, there are a couple of articles focused on, is there a brain center responsible for the appreciation of beauty? And the answer is no. Have prior generations thought about the science of beauty,
No, I
or
think
are
I
the
think this the science is definitely new, similar to the social science of happiness or fulfillment or contentment. And so coming at what makes people unhappy or happy is similarly something that's pretty novel over the last 15 or 20 years to have anyone actually actively researching science. But I guess I'm wondering out loud, are we substituting one institution, the institution of, peer-reviewed research? Are we substituting that for what would previously have been, patronage of the arts, or, uh, building magnificent cathedrals and painting frescoes, right? Are we substituting an institution, formal or informal, for a previous institution that has, waned or fallen by the wayside? And in reality, are these institutions just always shuffling across time?
well, let's double click there. If prior institutions sanctioned beauty as a means of expression, what were they trying to? What was the reason for that expression? What was the genesis? Like, if Catholic churches, or if the institution of religion, which historically has just been off the charts in terms of architecture,
Sure.
an expression of beauty via architecture.
Architecture, music, direct, art in all sorts of forms.
Okay, so why that institution? What makes the institution? And I'm again, I have opinions, but what do you think objectively was the uh, has been historically over a lot of generations, millennium, we could say, have led the institution of religion to sanction beautiful works of art and beautiful architectures?
Well, first of all, we have no choice but to take minimum European tour of a number of cathedrals, do a comparative study versus castles and estates. Preferably, I'd also get sort of the southern version of this and take a trip through Latin America to see the influence of the European, norms and attitudes towards art and the patronage system, and do a comparative study against how that worked in the colonial model, and then we can come back and I'll have all the answers. So we have to do the European tour. I haven't been to Europe in a really long time, but as a kid, I saw a couple of cathedrals, and the explanation that I picked up, I don't know if I was told this explanation. I don't know if this is accurate, but the understanding I got was, this is praise be to God in all of his glory, and we're going to, basically make monuments to the glory of God, right? Like that's the idea behind elaborate architecture. That's the
Okay,
idea between
so
gold leaf, like all that stuff.
your opinion today, as you sit in the atrium near the train tracks,
Near the train
is it
tracks.
is it your opinion that the absence of the desire to show respect to God or the gods is an evolution or devolution, if that's a word, however you want to look at it? Are the two things directly linearly related?
So my take on this, also the third leg of this journey is going to be going to contemporary megachurches and seeing how they compare.
That is not beauty.
You
I
have to
can
go.
confirm.
You have to go. If we're doing a comparative analysis,
Have you
yesterday
been?
I've I've set foot in a sanctuary of a megachurch. I've sat in traffic waiting for people to get into the megachurch. I have watched videos of productions that took place in megachurches. I have not attended a church service in any megachurch in any part of the world,
Well, I
but I
can
have
tell you
to
that
now for science. I have
I
to.
can tell you this. Um, it's going to be milk toast, probably, depending on the megachurch. The message, the sermon, whatever you want to call it, the homily, is going to be milk toast, but meaningful. And the music part, it's railroad ties through the eyeballs.
Our God is an
It's
awesome God, Terry.
Well, no, so it's like, hey, what is popular on the radio today? Let's do that, but we're not good enough to do it the way they do it. Church music is brutal to me. I grew up in church, so I can say
Same.
this. Like,
This is my comparison notes, though. When you look through the hymnal, somebody had to have written that stuff at some time, and that stuff was contemporary sometime. So, if you're listening to organ music and hymns, I mean, I grew up Protestant and in the Presbyterian and Methodist churches, so I don't know that the singing of hymns was intended to praise God in his glory with an elaborate show. I think it may have been more like, this is, respectful penance to the Lord by, through song. There was a lot of repeating of making a joyful noise to the Lord. That's a Bible verse, one of them.
yeah,
I'd have to Google it. Um,
Psalms, I believe.
so there
Psalms.
you go. That's all. It's in the Psalms. Um,
Psalms
I
stands up. Psalms stands up today.
Ecclesiastes is also still pretty solid.
Just read Ecclesiastes like the past few days.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. Now there's some stuff in there that you have to filter through, as is the case with a 2,000-year-old
Most
document.
old
But
documents, yeah.
yeah, but it's good. Anyway, I interrupted. Sorry.
I can answer your question though. You're asking about what happens when you devolve from church sponsored or church sanctioned, shows of beauty to something else. And I think that my take on this is uh it's a little bit, there's a couple of layers to it. So first, I think that the general increase in agnosticism and decrease in church going and overt religious expression in like the modern Western world, I think that is largely a factor of like reduced infant mortality and like the rise of a corporate structure and post-war economic boom and all these things that basically make it so that the uh, while life may still have certain drudgeries day to day, a contemporary science-minded person, is spending less of their time really, really like survive, like in survival mode, worried about like if I don't pray to God for rain, the family will starve next season type of subsistence living. So I think that it was a long path out of that. And, a lot of people that have, lost the church over time, they've lost the church over time as they basically feel like they don't need it, or they don't have the same degree of crisis level stress, or they're more generations removed from those crisis level stresses. But I think if the world falls on hard times, or if a person is picked up and put into a different circumstance, or if you just go to another part of the world, then the decline of religion doesn't look the same elsewhere. It looks like religion is alive and well globally, right? It's not the world is not turning away from God. Certain people are turning away from God and organized religion. So the individualization and the deinstitutionalizing of art and the arts, I think you can't separate that from the general trend away from religious observance in the modern United States. So I'm not sure what the conclusion is there, other than to say that generally I think having guardrails around your art is made for the sake of religion, has some benefits to it, in the sense that why you're making it, and you can't make certain things because they're going to be like not within the confines of what's allowed by your patron, or your institutional patron. But on the other hand, having a harder time finding where do I go to get art appreciated, understood, respected, and basically like consumed. I think that has a host of sort of downsides to it as well. You can't just say
Well,
I'm gonna go paint frescoes. You can't be a fresco painter today, especially not like a fresco painter laborer.
so we'll talk about art tomorrow specifically, but
Sure,
I just,
the two are so intertwined in my mind.
but see, I see it differently a little bit. Obviously, you can't conceptually approach beauty without having visual arts as part of that. I think music as well. But I heard your discussion about sort of the increasing agnosticism or the decreasing reliance on the supernatural because we understand a lot of things today. So, is it your position then that you know the construction of beauty, the construction of beautiful, and we were talking specifically about church, but the construction of beautiful churches and the sanctioning of the institution of the church to produce beautiful works of art, that those things have gone become less important because people generally don't value, because to me the ratio of people that don't go to, like, there's been a precipitous decline in a, appreciation of beauty, um, that outpaces the decrease in church participation or the significance of religion in society.
Mhm.
I think it's, and here's the other aspect I want to ask you about. We had a library, a public library built by Carnegie in the 18 whatevers in my hometown. That was my where I grew up. That was as beautiful as any of the church constructions. It was a beautiful building, not a religious institution, a public library. And I think maybe as the church went, so went society and culture. Through time, and that doesn't necessarily lie in opposition to what you just said, but or does it? That's what I'm asking.
So secular institutions have stepped in for things like, I want to have secular art. I don't want to have six different variations of Christian radio. I want to have a Christian radio station, and I want to have a talk radio station. I want to have the whole menu of radio stations is. And so as the so secular art is replacing religious art, same for architecture. And I think that the only point I would make about religious art versus secular art is, if you ask me, why does a library need to be a beautiful building? I cannot answer that question. I mean, I can explore the question, but I can't really answer the question. If you ask me, why does a church need to be a beautifully built building, I could tell you, for the glory of God. And we have our answer.
So why wouldn't they do that now?
Build a beautiful church for the glory of God.
Yeah.
I think that so use mega churches as the example. If now is not necessarily a golden age of cathedral-ish architecture, like a mega church is not a particularly attractive building from the outside. It's closer to a Walmart than it is to a to a cathedral.
Uh, that's a good analogy.
They are both large boxes without a lot of windows that are designed for space efficiency on the inside and managing a whole lot of people who drove their cars there. So big box church. So I think if you have so I was starting to say that this is not a golden age of architecture, right? At least not in the way we think of traditional architecture. And then, given that it's not a golden age of architecture, it is a golden age of media, right? As a arguably complementary, possibly competing medium, right? So, or competing institution, right? You have the institution of architecture, you have the institution of media. Media has been booming for 50 years or so, and that means that the glory to God in our art and beauty is now reflected as, we are going to make a giant multimedia production out of our church. So that, follow the path back to televangelism, and now get to today, where you have, every degree of production applied to religion. So the architecture isn't where the art lives. The architecture has been supplanted basically by, our art is in the content of what we're putting inside that building. Or you could even say it's in the hashtag content, because it's all about
We've
hashtag content.
we've kind of focused this a lot on churches and religion,
It's beauty. It turns out that
but
beauty and God, they're like peanut butter and jelly.
see, that's a thing. I mean, that's a thing to explore. But also the civic buildings, and maybe they were intertwined with the church as well. All of this was intertwined with the church, but civic buildings like courthouses, beautiful construction as well, and pristine materials, and they're it feels like, why wouldn't that today? Again, we've made our historical, I don't want to look backwards this entire discussion. Why would today, moving forward, there not be a revival of sorts of that thinking? Like, what prevents a society from wanting to build beautiful buildings and and sanction beautiful works of art, and like, what prevents that? Even if it's not, we want to funnel this through the institution of church. Why not? Because it's better for society.
So can beauty be cheap?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's okay. So can it?
There, and then there's two senses of cheap, right? So when focused on architecture or things like that, these are, or public buildings, these are highly visible, sort of mega project type things. They're beacons, right? So these are things that are, clearly able to be accessed by anybody who is in the place where this thing is. And something that's much more small scale, say, I don't know, a ship in a bottle, right? Like, the only people that can appreciate a ship in a bottle are the people that have that ship in the bottle right in front of them, right? And then you have all the context that's required. Why does the ship in the bottle matter? Like, why do we find ships beauty? Why is it, forget even about full, like about beauty, but just why is it aesthetically pleasing to have a ship realistically built in miniature? And why on earth did it go in a bottle? And then, what's the culture around ship in a bottle as a totem, right? Like, this is not, you can't ever, if you saw a ship in the bottle and it was the first time you ever saw a ship in the bottle, it's going to be totally different than when you already know that that's a convention. So the conventions around, gigantic visible stuff are expensive and require coordination across lots of people, or they require somebody who is, a beauty benevolent dictator, too strong a word, but certainly a benevolent
Money bags,
benefactor,
financier.
somebody that's like, I want it to be beautiful, so I'm going to make it look like this. And I think you'd be hard, I mean, say what you will about the actual egalitarian nature of America 2023. I think you'd be hard pressed to find, you know, a big chunk of society that's like, I'm in favor of somebody else spending a bunch of money on the beauty that they think is beautiful because that's a benefit to society. Like, what if you just don't like their tastes?
Well, I mean, that's where I was going to. Part of it is, it's not that there aren't equally complex constructions today
Yeah.
or buildings today. Aesthetic taste changes, and I want to get I want to get into that at some point. Like the science of beauty and what we view as beautiful or what we appreciate as beautiful. Those tastes are gonna change over time. I know as an artist, or I use that term loosely with myself, but as one who appreciates works of art, I like things like Basquiat is my favorite artist ever, hands down, no question. Uh, but that's atrocious for a lot of people that are more traditionalist in nature, that value the Impressionist era and things that are more traditionalist. So I
Right. So
think
that the evolution of culture is not the evolution of taste. It's the evolution of, is is beauty an important thing to the culture?
exactly.
Will it become more of a thing? Should it become more of a thing? How do you drive that as something?
Exactly. And not just, we're talking about one aspect of this. And this is how I framed it at the beginning. And not just the judging beauty by the aesthetic outcome at the end. What do we see today? But the intent, the cohesion of a community. Can you write public policy through the prism of beauty? Can you manage the institution of a corporation with beauty in mind?
You can see how
Uh,
people would answer that question with a flat no. I'm not going to answer it with a hard no, but tell me you can understand that a person might say, no, you cannot write beautiful public policy.
that's the literal, obvious interpretation of what I'm saying. I'm saying, um, can you write policy? Like we said, I mean, everything is meant to drive behaviors. As an example, that's a common theme, um, in the governing apparatchik, and I'll just leave it at that. Is we want to force behaviors. What about if you compel behaviors because if you believe as a group that something is for the common good, if you're not doing it because you want to encourage human flourishing, then that's a question. But can you not compel those behaviors, things that would lead to the outcomes that we want, lower crime, whatever? Uh, can that not be governed through beauty? Can you not encourage legislation, or can you write legislation that achieves outcomes through beauty and getting people to collectively look for beauty and support beauty? And I know you can do anything with tax incentives or with programs in school. What if we got rid of all the grievance studies in universities and replaced them with degrees of art, and not art specifically in the sense that art degrees exist today, but Public policy in art, public policy in beauty, like things that encourage beauty. I think there are, I don't have the answer. And that's not the objective of the conversation. The conversation is to seek a perspective. But what does that look like? Not just the objective aesthetic outcome, but sort of all the non-linearities associated with beauty. And then how do we have that be our prism for everything we're trying to do?
I have a mental block I can't get past in this conversation.
Uh-oh.
It's going to be several questions long, and they're related. Don't worry. They might not seem like it at first. Are peacocks beautiful? Specifically the males with the large, elaborate tail feathers?
I mean, I think subjectively to each individual, again, I'd like to understand the science of beauty that leads one to come to that conclusion. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, and certainly the aesthetic of a peacock tail or an individual feather, the aesthetic of the peacock dance, the aesthetic of the luminescent blue feathers not in the tail. These things exist in nature for the peacock to attract a mate. So there's an evolutionary reason for that beauty. I don't have a good answer as to what the evolutionary reason that we might think that those things are pretty to us because we're not birds. Has the science gotten to explaining whether a peacock, understands beauty, or is this just pure you know, like this? It's so beauty as signal, right? Is this a place where the science is coming in? Beauty as signal.
It's we need to do an hour on that and try to figure that out. That's what I want to understand is what is that? What is it that makes, that a utilitarian function for the peacock? But some of us think it is, some of us don't care, some of us are ambivalent. Is the, it's I don't accept that this is all magic. I accept that it's nonlinear, that there aren't easily sort of quantifiable, we won't understand it fully tomorrow and maybe never. A lot of these types of things are that way, but I'd at least like to get some scientific understanding of beauty.
I hate this is going to veer off into now a question of taste a little bit, but first of all, have you ever seen a cutaway of a mechanical device and thought about it as beautiful?
Oh, for sure. For sure. I saw, okay, here's an example. Somebody on Twitter posted this coffee, let's call it a system, a home system. It was like a $10,000 coffee system where this person would roast, grind, and then brew their espresso all in their house. This was an elaborate machine, stainless steel, intricate parts. You had to use special tools to put different pieces together. Now, I would never mess with it. It was a beautifully engineered system.
Was it? And do you think the engineering was part of what made it beautiful, or was it the end product?
So thank you. Those are my questions. Those are my questions. I promise you this. I promise you this. Okay. Um, Whoever the engineer was behind that system, it may not have been beauty per se, the prism that he had or she had as when designing that system, but there was a meticulous nature and intricacy that I see as beautiful and that I think anybody would respect as beautiful. So that's the question: is the intent or the dedication to the craft to make it flawless and excellence? I think excellence and beauty are synonymous in a lot of ways. But it's an excellent question. Like, does the intent of that engineer count as beauty? Do we
I've seen,
receive that as beauty?
so I've seen this. This actually happened to me. I've seen an engineer who I didn't know that well. This is a mechanical engineer or an aerospace engineer. Uh, they were observing the like it was basically a cutaway or an internal view of a propulsion system on some sort of weapons system, like a guided missile or something like that. And with not any bit of irony or possibly without any self-awareness, they were remarking out loud about how beautiful the system was. And I'm like, I can't help but have absolutely no idea what you're talking about in this case, because maybe internal to looking at this mechanism, there is some way to see beauty. But I know that this was designed by the defense industrial base, built by the defense industrial base, shipped to the lowest bidder, and is designed to be dropped on people to kill them from afar, right? Like, I have a really tough time, like, de-abstracting all of this other context and just saying, ah, what a beautiful device inside of this guided missile. And I was clearly not in the same mind space as the other person who was looking at it and was like, they genuinely thought this was beautiful. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of. I mean, the obvious response to that would be the revulsion of a weapon of war being something that's beautiful, and who knows why? Again, who knows why that person received? Maybe it's the physical systems that came together to create
Well,
that. I can.
but turn back the clock. Not to emphasize the past, but you know, how did we get to elaborate firearms and elaborately decorated firearms, or a sword that's a decorative sword? These things have been vaunted as artworks for forever, basically. Even though, like, that's at one point there was no space between here's the decorative one and here's the real one, and then the space grew and grew and grew, and you end up with decorative swords. To the best of my knowledge, there aren't a lot of grandpas with decorative guided missiles on their walls, but there
I
could be in
mean,
the future. It's not out to lunch to imagine that.
again, I think that could be. It just seems like that's a logical extension of the conversation around religion, and that the ability to defend oneself or to hunt or to that is such a sacred institution for that era that the tools used to exact that were ornate, or maybe to or signify that the person using that tool was very skilled at using the tool for the same reasons.
So we're
So
not
it's
so
a
so beauty is then it's derived, and it's based on symbols and meanings and subtext and context and all of these things, and that's where we're talking about it.
So it's two things, and it's a great point. That's a really, really good point. So it's the subtext, the symbols, all of that, on the explanation of why beauty went into it, into the creation of what it is. But then it's also how we receive what is beautiful. They obviously built things. They weren't building they weren't trying to make those things ugly. They built them in a way that was appreciated, that was received as this is supposed to be special. So it's the meaning and the intent, but then it's also the aesthetic choices that were made to signify that that was a meaningful apparatus
Right,
building.
and now we're talking about the culture, as in the fabric that ties us all together and causes us to seek common good and build each other up, or you know all aspects of culture that are now societal and social, uh, come to, like, there's an expression of beauty, there's a reception of beauty. These things reinforce, similar to a peacock offers a beautiful peacock dance with a glorious tail feather, and the peahen receives, and
So,
that's reinforcing a social mechanism for peacocks.
okay, so that's the point. It's tough not to get into a discussion of, well, we're not doing that today, and why is that? Because that to me feels obvious. That feels like it doesn't feel like that there's a a cultural emphasis. It's all very individualistic. It's all the person wants to be seen as beautiful in an individualistic way, not we as a society want to show our gratitude, or that we revere this or that institution or this function or that function. So we want to build beautiful things. We want beauty to be associated with these things. I think it's whether by design or just by default. I think the individualism of today has taken what was a communal thing. Communities wanted to build beautiful things, and now the person just wants to be perceived as beautiful. Everybody else be damned. And in fact, it's a race to compete against, this person or that person for the title of, for to be beautiful.
I don't think it's particularly difficult to make the case that individualism and selfishness go hand in hand, right? I mean, these things would logically reinforce one another. I think it's harder to make the case that, you know, cultural, social beauty was superior. And I think it's also a little bit hard to quantify the extent to which, you know, so even disregarding a definition of an entire culture at any point in time, or place. I think even if you get past that hurdle, trying to say cultural reinforcement existed more at X time and place than it does, today, also without expressing a specific time or a specific place. I mean, there are places where individual subcultures are extraordinarily strong and are extraordinarily focused on beauty, I think,
So
even in the
here's
United States.
here's a good litmus test, to or thought experiment or case study, a real life case study. And I know all the connotations that go along with this, and I don't care. It's
Oh, this
not
should be
That's not the
good.
point. Yeah, East Germany and West Germany, pre-unification, pre-fall of the Berlin Wall in '89. Um, there's a difference in a lot of things, and how can that be explained? Same people, ethnically, everything else, same origins. How can that be explained? Because you can definitely still today, and I know because I've done it, see the differences between the two countries. Well, it's one country now, but what was East Germany and what is West Germany? You can see the differences in architecture and sort of our umbrella term beauty today. And how can that be explained?
I, I do not, and I'm never going to have an answer to that, but I do think it's the perfect example of the closest you're going to get to being able to objectively say, you know, there's no difference except there was a wall in the middle and there was a divide. And I think you have the strongest possible case that
Well, there is a difference.
East Berlin isn't beautiful, right? Like that's what you're saying, right? Is East Berlin is not beautiful.
Yeah, and I remember seeing a map once. Again, this is not beauty per se, but I remember seeing a map once, um, and I may have been when I was in Germany, of all of the companies, the global corporations headquartered in West Germany, versus those in East Germany.
Sure,
And
yeah.
it was like Puma and something else in East Germany, and like all of the industrial base of Germany proper in West Germany. And I mean, is it as simple as they had different political systems for a given period of time? And what about that? Again, I think it's worth studying. What about the difference in political systems? Why would a different method of governance result in a desire to hinder or squash beauty?
I have a I have a hang up around where the line between, and this is like saying East Berlin is less beautiful. So the taste problem versus the institution problem get intertwined. This is an example, right? So if I was reading a catalog. That's right, a catalog, not a magazine. I was reading a catalog for a interior design brand, I'm not going to say what it was. It doesn't matter what it was. I don't want to be mean to any interior design brand. But it wasn't IKEA and it wasn't restoration hardware, but it was really freaking expensive, whatever the stuff was. Like I do not own anything from this catalog. And it had articles in a catalog that were interviews with designers. And there was an interview with this designer who had designed a series of rugs. And I can't remember the precise wording of this quote, and I can't find it because it turns out that the historical log of catalogs is less good than the historical log of magazines. But the quote was, and I'm not even joking about this, it was like, a rug must inspire and thrill. And all I could think, must it? Must it really? And so I'm like the boundary between absurd taste chasing versus this is a societal function. I find it really, really, really hard to pick apart like which of these things are taste based and which of these things are about, an entire culture or an entire institution. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I think,
Well, let me ask you first. Must a rug thrill and inspire?
I mean, from a functional utilitarian perspective, no. But I subscribe, however pretentious, and I think it's like, the Ford F-150 guy that has the coal dust or whatever that goes out of his truck.
Rolling coal.
Yeah, that dude is not somebody I want to hang out with, but we need that guy. I think we
There.
need the same.
There.
We need the person that wants your living room rug to inspire and
Totally.
and
A
make
hundred
a statement.
percent. 100%. If I don't have a designer who is arguably a complete zealot about rug design, it means that all other rug designs down the food chain from extreme zealot number one, which I'm assuming this wasn't even the most zealous rug designer out there, right? This is probably second tier, third tier, maybe even in terms of rug design zealotry. And if that
This
person
is
doesn't exist, then you get in, then everything just ends up being like, beige polyester carpet, and nobody cares about anything anymore. And then society starts to fall apart, all for want of a more beautiful rug.
now
I'm with you. I'm with you.
now combine that across every aspect of society
Right.
where beauty has historically played a role, and then do you start to, maybe can you start to question or understand more why 1 in 10 American adults Americans over the age of 12 is on an antidepressant?
Sure, but
Or
somewhere there's a pharmaceutical sales rep who sees these numbers and is poring over a chart and is thinking, God, it's beautiful. It's just, it's so beautiful.
yeah, we'll leave that alone. We'll leave that alone. I don't know. There are no um, I really want to understand. I just wanted to kind of kick the tires on this topic. I think I want to dive real singularly into the concept of beauty and science. Um, do we have someone on that can help us understand that? Do we, sit and throw out a bunch of studies that neither of us are qualified to really vouch for the veracity of? What's the best way to get a meaningful scientific conversation about beauty?
Well, for starters, I think that as we continue to essentially vlog the complete works of Terry, um, I think it'll answer itself, right? So there are threads, and there are areas, and you are exposing. I wouldn't say these are bones to pick per se. These are more tenets, right? So these are the 95 theses. Not to make it religious again. These are Terry's 95 theses, nailing, and you're in the process of writing them down. Next, you're going to nail them to the door, and then then we're gonna distribute these to somewhere. So I don't think it has to go farther for now. I think that the method of how scientific do you want to get, and how rigorous, are you trying to explore science, or are you trying to explore, philosophy? And are you trying to explore research, or are you trying to explore logic? All of these things are sound, and circling in on what's the level of rigor that matters, or what's the level of repeatability that matters, or what's the level of art versus science that you're trying to zone in on. I don't think that's a question that has to be answered anytime soon. Throw me some studies
Def-
about the science of happiness, and that'll be a great start.
Definitely want to understand that. But also, I want to challenge this sounds just ridiculous to even say, but I want somehow for younger generations when they write their history books 60 years from now, I want them to scoff at our post World War II, post World War One, turn of the century, turn of the 19th century. I want them to scoff at the way every institution levied compliance and fear and control through coercion as a means for enacting outcomes. I want them to scoff, and I want part of their plank to be beauty. We've changed from what is it, the age of Aquarius to the age of Pisces. Why can't these things be different? And I don't even know if I don't follow astrology, so I don't even know if there's an overlap in this context. But why can't it be, why can't a means of bettering society and bettering humanity, why can't the model move from coercion and compliance and um, force and fear and move to beauty? And not just that the church is sanctioning beautiful art construction or public buildings are constructed beautifully, but that as a society we want to select for beauty and not the aesthetic outcome of this person's attractive or that person's attractive, but what is beautiful in society. Let's do a lot of that. There's a Bible verse in, I think, Colossians, one of the letters that Paul wrote. There's a Bible verse that says, whatever is pure, whatever is noble, whatever is, I think beautiful is one of them. Think on these things. Well, how do you incorporate that? And it doesn't have to be religious per se. Maybe it does. That's what we were teasing out earlier. But how do you weave that into the fabric of society? And the generation 60 years from now, I hope they figure it out. I hope they do it.
When they're scoffing, it's not going to be in the history books. It's going to be in their punk rock music.
It's going to be on Snapchat or the 60 year from now Snapchat equivalent.
Yeah, it'll be some SoundCloud rapper, but whatever happens 60 years from now for SoundCloud rappers.
Isn't that weird? You just sort of threw that out there flippantly. It
What,
is
SoundCloud
so
rappers?
No, it's so counterculture now. The concept of beauty is actually punk rock today. Like the concept of the beauty in the context that we're talking about it is very much an anti-establishment position.
I mean, before it was punk rock, it was rock and roll. Before it was rock and roll, it was whatever came before rock and roll. I mean, counterculture has always been there.
Well, for
There's
sure.
always been some amount of counterculture. So that's where the scoffing is going to come from. The history books are going
So
to be clucking their tongues at how the kids today have it all wrong.
So that was a great segue into tomorrow because we'll be talking about the evolution of culture of art and music tomorrow, and I think that'll be more retroactive than forward looking. But I might have a bone or two to pick tomorrow.
I would say my my homework assignment for you is who's the oldest rapper?
Oh man,
You don't have to answer now. You can use Chat GPT to get you the answer.
I think Roger Miller's got to be he's got to be considered in the running.
Who's
Pasty
Roger
white,
Miller?
come on, man. He's a wordsmith, and he's kind of, some of his stuff was kind of gimmicky, but he's also is very gimmicky. The song trailers for sale or rent, rooms still at 50 cents, King of the Road.
King of the Road. Yeah, yeah, I know this
Yeah,
song.
that's Roger Miller. He's got like a catalog of really goofy sort of gimmicky stuff, and I don't care for that. He's got an album called called Words and Music. I think it's from '68. From top to bottom, immaculate. It's stark. It's really well written. There's a lot of space sonically. Um, the cover's fantastic. Words and Music, Roger Miller, 1968.
I'll check it out. I'll let you know tomorrow.
He's he's not the oldest rapper, by the way.
We'll find out tomorrow.
When do you fly back?
Couple hours.
Oh, today.
Yeah. Same time tomorrow. Back on regular schedule.
Yeah, with the bright background.
Not this nice natural
It
whatever
does
this
look
is.
like you're about to ascend into the heavens.
I'm not gonna do that.
Yeah, because then the lightning bolt will pierce through the atrium